Ukraine has become the focus of geopolitical attention in recent weeks as a Russian troop buildup along its borders and a list of demands from the Kremlin have prompted threats of sanctions by the West and military deployment by NATO allies. As attempts to defuse the crisis diplomatically continue, world leaders have embarked on a flurry of international visits in recent days to try to resolve the standoff. The US has said that Russia is planning to fabricate a pretext for an invasion of Ukraine, and that an attack by Moscow would result in significant loss of civilian life. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union before it collapsed at the end of the Cold War in 1991, and it borders Russia to its east. The disintegration of the Soviet Union left Russia with a vastly depleted population, territory, and economy. It also diminished Russia's superpower status. Now Russian President Vladimir Putin is seeking to reclaim some of that glory and undo some of what Russia lost in the Cold War. He has described Russians and Ukrainians as one people, a single whole. Russia has repeatedly denied having plans to invade. But Moscow has massed more than 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border and has been moving tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, rocket launchers and other military equipment westward from bases in Russia's Far East. In addition, Russia is moving troops and S-400 surface-to-air missile systems into Belarus, which borders Ukraine and NATO members Poland, Latvia and Lithuania. Russia also has moved several ships near Ukraine's shores in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. It is also holding naval exercises in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and in the Arabian Sea with Chinese naval forces. On January 25, Moscow announced new military exercises in the North Caucasus. In late January, Western defense officials said Russia had sent medical units to the front, moving to a level of readiness that it hadn't reached in past buildups. In massing troops near Ukraine, Mr. Putin's goal is to extract concessions from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and force him to give Russia a say in Ukraine's future. That would send a message to other former Soviet states that the West can't guarantee their security. To ratchet up the pressure, Mr. Putin has an array of military options short of a full occupation, from low-profile incursions to a limited conflict in the eastern Donbass region, where Russian-backed separatists have declared themselves independent of Ukraine, but aren't recognized by the government in Kiev. U.S. officials said on February 3 that intelligence shows a Russian plan to stage a fabricated attack by Ukrainian military or intelligence personnel against Russian sovereign territory, or against Russian-speaking people, to justify an incursion into Ukraine. The plan would include Moscow's use of a propaganda video that would depict graphic scenes, according to administration officials, of a staged, false explosion with corpses, actors depicting mourners and images of destroyed buildings and military equipment. Ukraine is located in Eastern Europe and its eastern flank borders Russia. To the west, it is bordered by Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Moldova, and to the north by Belarus. The Black Sea runs along Ukraine's southern coast. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union when Ukraine gained its independence, the U.S. has had diplomatic relations with the country. The U.S. is eager to see Ukraine thrive as a democracy in the face of what the State Department describes as continued Russian aggression. Ukraine isn't a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but it is a partner country to the military alliance, and agreements in place mean it could become a NATO member in the future. Mr. Biden has said that Ukraine's prospective membership of NATO isn't likely in the near term, though he said the decision ultimately belongs to the alliance. NATO allies are bolstering the alliance's eastern flank, which borders Ukraine, deploying jet fighters and ships to the region in response. The European Union has set out plans for loans and grants to Ukraine worth more than $1.3 billion. The Pentagon ordered thousands of troops to prepare for possible deployment. The U.S. and NATO allies have established an air bridge ferrying military aid to Ukraine in an attempt to shore Kiev up against a possible Russian invasion. Mr. Putin has been clear about wishing to reassert Russia's influence over its neighbors, particularly Ukraine. In 2014, he annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, fomenting an 8-year war in the country's east. But he has cultivated an aura of unpredictability about his next moves. So far, Mr. Putin has left Western leaders guessing about whether he would stage a major invasion of Ukraine and provoke a possible breakdown in ties with the West, or whether he would be satisfied with wringing a few concessions from an expansive list of demands he has put forth. These include that NATO guarantees that it won't give membership to Ukraine. Moscow has also demanded that NATO curb military exercises in Ukraine and other former Soviet nations, and that the alliance pull its forces back from its eastern member states. NATO deployed about 5,000 troops to Poland and the Baltic countries after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. In his first public remarks on the crisis since December, Mr. Putin on February 1 repeated complaints about NATO's presence in Poland, Romania, and the Baltics, and said Moscow has significant worries about Ukraine joining the US-led alliance. The Russian leader said the US and its European allies had basically ignored Moscow's demands for security assurances, but expressed a willingness to continue talks. Mr. Putin met Chinese leader Xi Jinping at a summit in Beijing ahead of the Olympics, where they presented a united front against the US, opposing America's global network of alliances and seeking to nudge it aside as the sole superpower. On February 7, French President Emmanuel Macron met with Mr. Putin for more than 5 hours of talks inside the Kremlin. Mr. Macron said the Russian leader had given him assurances that he was open to exploring ways to defuse the Ukraine crisis. The US and its allies rejected Moscow's demands at a series of meetings with Russian officials in mid-January, arguing that states are free to associate with any other states they choose. The US delivered unpublished proposals to the Russian Foreign Ministry on January 26 that, according to US officials, included constraints on military maneuvers that Moscow considers provocative. But the Russian leader said his fundamental concerns, a drawdown of NATO troops and a bar on Ukraine joining the alliance, had been ignored. Mr. Biden said that if all of the troops on the border moved into Ukraine, it would amount to the largest invasion since World War II. Russia has amassed sufficient combat power to take cities and substantial swaths of territory in Ukraine, according to the Pentagon. Should Russia continue adding to its forces and then mount an all-out attack to try to take over the entire country, 25,000 to 50,000 civilians would be killed or wounded, U.S. intelligence assessments project. The extent of the toll would depend on how much fighting there would be in urban areas. Between 3,000 and 10,000 Russian troops, and between 5,000 and 25,000 Ukrainian troops would be killed or wounded, according to the assessments, which added that 1 million to 5 million Ukrainians would be displaced. In the event of an invasion of Ukraine, the US has said it would unleash a barrage of fresh economic sanctions against Russia, hitting major banks, state companies, and key imports, though the targets have yet to be confirmed. Mr. Biden has also said the US and NATO would consider further beefing up their presence in Eastern Europe. Experts say that despite efforts by Moscow to sanction-proof its economy since penalties were imposed after it annexed Crimea, harder-hitting measures could cause the country broad economic pain. Ukrainian leaders, excluded from US-Russia talks over the standoff, have urged their citizens not to panic and say the Kremlin's likely aim isn't to invade, but to destabilize their country in more insidious ways. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a Russian-speaking ex-comedian who had no political experience, wants his country to join the EU and NATO. He came to power in 2019 promising to end the continuing war with Russia-backed separatists in the east of Ukraine that has so far claimed 14,000 lives. Many Ukrainians, having endured 8 years of that conflict, are resigned and prepared for war with Russia. Ukraine is bulking up its territorial defense force, aiming to have a brigade of reservists in each of the country's regions, able to react quickly if Russia blasts or sneaks its way through. And in the largest city in eastern Ukraine, sentiment has shifted dramatically against the Kremlin. Any Russian military operation in Kharkiv is now likely to face significant resistance from ordinary civilians. See you in new videos. Goodbye.